as we start to talk about selecting blockchain solutions in government, I just have a quick question. How many of you are here from a government agency? Can we get a raise of hands? Fantastic. And how many of you are providers that are selling to government agencies? Okay, so it looks like we have more folks from government agencies, which is fantastic. So we'll lean a little more heavily on that. I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Amelia Powers Gardner. I'm currently a county commissioner in Utah County, Utah. And prior to that, I was the county clerk auditor. I implemented 2 blockchain solutions as the county clerk. That was voting on a blockchain. I was the second person in the country to do that for overseas and military members, and the first to do it for domestic population, people with disabilities. And we did marriage licenses on a blockchain. We launched that in 2019 and had that fully functional through COVID, and we've done over 50,000 of them. Yes, you heard me correctly, 50,000. Thank you. And I currently am on the Utah Blockchain Task Force, the National Association of Counties Telecommunications and Technology Board, their Blockchain Advisory Committee, and their AI Advisory Committee. And I'm a co-founder of the Utah Blockchain Coalition and a GovTech SaaS company called InnoGov. So blockchain and government is my jam. Long story. We're going to give you, each of our panelists, I'm going to ask them to take about 2 minutes to introduce themselves and tell us a little about who you are and how you're going to, how your background is going to help us pick a blockchain solution.
So I am Dr. Adel Missi. I already introduced myself earlier on, so I'm going to give my time to my colleagues here. I'm just going to add one more thing, is that I had the pleasure of having lunch with Emilia last time when we were here before. Great to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Jiri. My background is banking. I spent 15 years in banking as a core banking expert when I was younger and smarter. Then about 7 years ago, I moved to the blockchain space. And as a technical person, I learned that it's very difficult to actually build something in blockchain. So I started a company and we built open source. We built open source framework for developers so they can build easily blockchain solutions. Because if you think about banking, the way how it works, you have developers in the banks, they are using dozens of technologies, they can't be experts as they shouldn't, and they just use frameworks to make things happen, right? So we build this. We have now 170,000 projects actually using us. We raised $50 million last year after the market meltdown, so still good. And I think we have most customers in the US. Most non-paying developers, open source, are coming from South America and Asia. So my focus is here in the US because there is most of the paying customers for us.
Hi. So I'll take one hat off and put another hat on. I wear many hats, and if you go and look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see there's a lot on there. But for this one, first of all, I've been involved in open source for over 2 decades. And I actually started off, the reason I went to open source was because of open government. And I started working on a project with Bill Bradley and Jimmy Wales from Wikipedia called the Transparent Federal Budget Project, where we actually created a DLT using Mercurial, which kind of lost to Git. It's still out there, but most people use Git, and Merkle trees. So, so that's the starting off point. Since then, I've done a lot of stuff along those lines, everything from working with nonprofits and doing things of that nature, doing different types of technologies. I was the VP of Hyperledger. I worked at PayPal doing enterprise search, and most recently I helped IEEE launch their open standards program for doing open data, open source, and open hardware. Currently, right now, I'm in the process of launching this new nonprofit, and I'm also working on the business side of it, which is the citable AI portion. So a lot of stuff.
That's great. It sounds like we have a fantastic panel to help us in government pick a blockchain provider for any solution. We'll jump right in. My first question that I would like your guys' help finding solutions for those of us in government. When we look at a problem, how do we determine, is blockchain even necessary? Basically, what type of projects need blockchain, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of utilizing blockchain for projects?
So let me take a shot on that. So I teach students, just graduated 12 students at the AUC that do blockchain. And the very first question every year is, what's blockchain good for? Absolutely nothing. If you have to pick the right tool for the right problem. If you want something that is just a storage of data, like a database, blockchain is much slower than a database. Blockchain is not going to perform the same way, and it is more expensive than it. So you have to identify the problem that you want to solve first, and then identify the gap between it and the current solutions that exist out there. And then, and only then, you can pick blockchain in general, and then go into like which blockchain. So for example, one big thing that you should be considering is, do you need it to be immutable? Do you need it to be decentralized? Do you need to have access to it in different areas without one controlling gate? Are you going to put some incentivization? Are you trying to create some utility tokens, for example, on top of it? And so forth. Things like with those nature are more blockchain. Things that are storage of data or stuff like that, I'm sorry, but you cannot create a new blockchain tea company because it does not work.
That was quite the list. Did anyone take a note of all of those things? That was a fantastic list of parameters that we should judge it against. Jiri, do you have any insight on that?
No, I think I have nothing to add. I mean, that was pretty much it. It was pretty exhausting.
It was very all-encompassing.
I mean, again, like, you know, that's a good point. Blockchain is database. We have databases. We have smart contracts. In normal databases, we have procedures. So, you know, it's pretty much the same thing, just you can change it. So it actually brings additional issues, like, you know, in life, a lot of things are changing. And if you code something in blockchain, you can't really change that unless you break some rules. So then what, right? You have to think about that as well. Not many people think about that, actually. So we have seen a lot of failures technically, and, you know, in the architecture of the applications. So I agree. That's pretty much, you have to think about it if you really need it, because it's lower. It's going to be more expensive, unless you have actually a very good reason why you use that. And, you know, I don't know if you guys remember that, but we had and we have SQL databases, and then we had no SQL databases, and guess what? No SQL databases. 15 years ago, we had them. No one cared about them. No one. Today, everyone is using NoSQL. They don't even question why. They just use them blindly. No one is using SQL anymore except analytical companies. So I guess we will get there at some point, but agree. I mean, you have to still think about it a lot. But again, it's a data storage. You don't have, I mean, if you want to store data, that's it. You have to think if you need something immutable, that's where you have to think about.
I agree that you definitely need to look at the features and need to look at all of those different aspects before you choose your individual blockchain, because there are so many elements of the technology. You know, as Bryant was saying earlier, you know, blockchain 91, 79, you know, 2008, it all depends on like what piece of the technology you decided to focus in on for determining when blockchains arrived to the ethos or whatever. But all of those technologies have existed for a while in different usages, and it's sort of the same thing. You just go back to a lot of that, and you sit there and you evaluate it based off of that. But I say that you have to do a lot more than that. In the open source world, you need to do your research. You need to check on the communities. You need to sit there and see what the diversity looks like. You know, if you are choosing to do if you choose to go and attach yourself to an existing blockchain, you need to really research to make sure that that blockchain is going in the directions that you would like for it to go to. Some of them are focusing on DeFi. Some of them are focusing on data like Filecoin. Some of them, there's a lot of different focuses that are out there, and you need to sit there and figure out which of those works for you feature-wise, but you also need to look at their community, because that's how you're going to understand whether or not it's sustainable. There's a lot of stuff going on with the Digital Public Goods Alliance, where they've done a standard for their digital public goods, where they look at a lot of that different thing. And then there's also the digital principles, where they look at that as well. And I think you really need to look at where the financing is coming through. There's so many different aspects in regards to that like I have a checklist, but I don't feel like I can outline it here. but you do need to sit there and say, you know, how deployable is it? How usable is it? How much do you see other people writing new stuff on it? You know, there's all these different pieces that you need to actually go and look at before you actually adopt that one, because it might be, you know, they were making jokes on Silona earlier, and it's like, well, if there's certain things where you notice that they do make those kinds of, they're not as methodical, say like Cardano, then it's like, okay, well, maybe I want methodical and I want, you know, they're focused in on academia and research, so I'm going to go that direction. Or you go, oh, no, you know, I want to make sure that I can, you know, make lots of money with a whole bunch of different people, so I'm going to go over, you know, and do Ethereum, so I can be over here. Or, you know, there's just all these different reasons for it, and you need to know who they are.
Yeah, no, I think you made a great point, especially when it comes to the funding behind it. As government entities, we have to be very careful about who we attach ourselves to, right? Even if we ourselves have not made a misstep, if someone at the organization or the funders of the organization have a compromised reputation, then that can reflect on us as a government and the solution we're using. The next question that I wanted to talk about was, when we look at a blockchain, how do we judge, or what are maybe some of the risks involved with security and privacy, data governance, and ownership?
Governance is huge. And that's one reason why I've been participating so much with GBA and other different groups, is to talk about the standardization of the governance. Because if you don't know how that's taking place, you know, bad things can happen, negative takeovers can happen, all sorts of different things can happen. And so for me, you really do have to make sure that the governance is done correctly and openly and transparently, and you can determine whether or not it's going to be safe for you in that matter.
So you touched on a very good point, which is kind of like, you know, who are the people that actually created this blockchain? Because blockchains did not like exist poof without people actually creating them. So you want to know their background. You want to know if they have been involved with any nefarious projects before or not, which is very important for government, very important for organizations of big scales. And blockchains, when you come to that, they are different ones. So there are ones that are purely like were created and then evolved by the community, versus one that are more private options, like Ledger, for example. You can create that and install your private version of it locally in it. And there are blockchains that are geared towards speed and becoming public facing. You have Polygon, you have Solana. There are ones that are designed for institutional access, like, for example, Casper. So Casper has a CTO, a CEO, people that can be held accountable in case of something that needs, you know where they live, you know all the history about them, while you don't know the rest of the public. Cardano has an academic focus. So if you are thus inclined and you see the record of the academia, then that's your cup of tea to go with it. I'll also conclude with another thing that, to me, because I am a PhD, so I study different blockchains on how they behave. And when you try to study something, you have to create some criteria around it. So beside one that we've spoken about, there are other things like TPS, transactions per seconds, and number of transactions that happen on it. And then is it upgradable or not? So for example, on all EVMs, normal contracts are not upgraded, but if you want to upgrade them, you need to use a proxy contract or a diamond proxy standard to use it. Casper, for example, built with upgradability from the beginning. So it depends, like, start with the end at mind. If you are doing something that will always evolve and change, and you want to upgrade it all the time, you have to pick something that can either be architected for upgradability or is upgradable for the beginning.
Yeah, that's a great point. That actually leads us into the next point that I was going to talk about, and that is, what types of questions should we be asking when it comes to scalability and performance? I know speed of transaction is a big deal in a lot of the private sector, but in the public sector, if we're not dealing in financial transactions, if we're dealing in maybe records, speed isn't nearly as important as some of the other things. So what types of questions should we be asking around scalability and performance when we're determining what blockchain solution is best for our use case?
Thank you. So scaling, honestly, we have over those 170,000 projects. We have seen a lot of them fail. Surprisingly, my my lessons learned from that is that most of those projects were great as long as no one were using them. That was pretty much what happened. And there's multiple layers of why it's, there was performance or, scalability issues. Not that much about the actual blockchain and the throughput. Mostly it was also because they had very wrong architecture of the whole application, and the whole design was basically wrong. So in most cases, it goes this way. But when you are talking about the actual blockchain, the first thing is you should never bet performance of your app and scalability on one chain. That's pretty much stupid. If anything you will take from this conference, take this, please. I mean, plus other things also. Because this is not about being religious. This is not about being, I go with Solana or with Polygon or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. They will all at some point crash. Polygon crashed a couple of times last year. So this is for a fact. It's not kind of question if it will happen. It happens all the time. And so if you are building your solution, never build it on just one chain, because it will not last. You have to go, if you want to, you should basically go multi-chain by design. That would be my advice. And we learned that hard way in the past 5-6 years. Not we, I mean, projects we have seen.
In regards to scalability, that's a hard one for me because I'm a nerd and I've done a lot of scalability, and so I want to go like super into it, but I know that not everybody here is into that. I would look at just production readiness in general, because that's going to tell you more than just scalability, because like he brought up the interoperability, you want to sit there and figure out like how do they recover, what does recovery look like, what does it look like for all of those different pieces, and all of that's kind of like, getting ready for production readiness. Like for anything that goes on PayPal, it's 90 different steps that you have to do to make sure that everything is there so that you do not take PayPal.com down. And so you have to go through and like look at it from that kind of perspective. And I don't think that everyone's always qualified to do so, which is why I like standards. It's because then I can go and nerd out and nobody hates me, while everyone else thinks I'm, too pedantic. But scalability can be important. It doesn't have to be. I think like when once again, it's the application. If you're looking at something like global supply chain, for example, right, you need to make sure that you can abstract out your cryptography, right? Because if you want to start off in China or Russia, you're going to have to go use theirs, and then you're going to bring yourself over, and you don't want to keep using theirs because you don't want them to continue spying on all of your commodities. So, you have to put yours in, and then like you want to abstract out the identity portions, right? So that way you can do the DIDs and you can work over here, and then you want to do the interoperability portions with some of the other chains, and oh, hey, could we do a side chain where we could then go and optimize for speed and make sure that we have all the security protocols there with verification applications? It's just, do you see what I'm saying? Like there's a lot of pieces there. And I think for a lot of it, go back to some of your old school software production readiness people and make sure that all those T's are crossed and those I's are dotted.
If I can add just one thing, also what happens a lot, what we are seeing very, very often is that people are testing scalability, they do just few operations, few transactions. Surprisingly, when you scale out, it actually starts behaving very differently. We had a client, they were minting 1,000, and I don't know, I know you people hate NFTs, I hate them as well, but anyway. They were minting 1,000 NFTs per minute. And then that's a very different case when you mint one per hour. And so when they started to mint 1,000, they become collisions, then they become a lot of issues they never anticipated. And then they actually couldn't catch up, right? And so a lot of other issues, and that goes with what Silona is saying. And so production readiness is a huge topic, and I think we should be using Web 2 mindset when we build Web 3 projects. It's just another technology in our stack. It's not, it will change the world, hopefully, but I mean, it's not changing the way and the process we are building things. We should still think about what we are doing. And I don't see that very often in Web 3 space, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different applications where like speed isn't an issue. Like say if you wanted to do confidential documentation, great, and everyone's like, oh, database. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, really? Databases weren't actually made for security to be inherent to it. instead while blockchains were. So now you can encrypt everything and then use the blockchain itself instead of all these other applications. You use it for chain of custody, permissioning, and provenance. And then suddenly, okay, now you've got a better way of doing that. And what's the speed hit? Well, the speed hit is entering that to the database, which isn't significant. You should have been tracing that already on your other existing database systems, and if you weren't, shame on you. And then, which is probably going to be the same. And then the encryption, and once again, if you're not doing that, also shame on you. So, you know, I think that there's a lot of different things, and that's why sometimes I get nervous about saying blockchain, because I never know what piece of the technology it is that you're talking about and why. And so that's why, as he said at the very beginning, you have to start off knowing what it is you want to do and why you want to do it that way. And then a good technologist should be able to tell you what those different pieces are and what those options are. You know, like I said, in 2004, I did Mercurial with Merkle trees, because Merkle trees have existed since '79, and I learned about them in the '80s.
Right. No, that's a great point.
So I want to like switch the question a little bit. Is you don't ask what, but actually ask whom. So if I were you and you are trying to pick a blockchain, don't go and consider the marketing material. Just look at the most active developers in that space, invite him or her to a nice dinner, have some chats on it, and just by the time they had a couple drinks, they're going to start telling you and spilling the beans, and you know what's happening in that ecosystem. And then repeat with the other ones. And then out of those, determine which one you want to go with. Because even with any blockchain, they do upgrades, they do changes, and all of a sudden, all your code is broken and fires everywhere. So you want to know like how they upgrade, how they work with this, and what would be your upgrade strategy plan to do this.
Well, this is a fantastic advice. As a government official, do it within the bounds of your gift policy for your government entity.
Well, and that's why I brought up governance, right? I mean, if you don't have some form of governance in regards to that, where the community is making a decision, and if your community is not diverse, you're going to be leaving a lot of people out. And there's going to be a lot of different things that happen in regards to that. Way too often, I see a community where it's just too much tech dudes, and you don't have any minorities, you don't have any people that are disenfranchised, you don't have any of that going on, and guess what? They invent some dangerous systems because they can handle that risk. So you need to look more deeper at it, and that's why I sit there and say you really have to look at the community, and you really need to look at the governance, because those are the people who are going to make the decisions about that application. You know, like the Linux Foundation with Hyperledger, what it did is it brought a whole bunch of different companies together to make those decisions. And that's how they go forward. And then they also have, you know, a marketing steering committee, which then helps with the features and the differentiations and things of that nature. When I was at IEEE, I created a community one where the nonprofits could actually come in and have their say as well. And it's just kind of like you have to go and look and sit there and see, for government, are your people actually being represented, and will it fit for your people?
Yeah, and I think you make a great point when we talk about risk tolerance. It's kind of a joke in my state that my risk tolerance is significantly higher than most elected officials' risk tolerance, and it is infinitely greater than my lawyer's risk tolerance. Right, my risk tolerance is a little bit worse. I'm an engineer, and so I make more money in the private sector than I do in the public sector. So I'm willing to be a little more cavalier, because I'm like, challenge me, unelect me, and I'll go back to the private sector and make money again. But when you're looking at your solutions in your government, look at those who are the ones that the news is going to call if things fail, and you see what their risk tolerance is, right? There might be times that you see a blockchain that looks really sexy to you, but it's a little bit too risky for that government application. That was a great point. I want to move into our next topic, and that is interoperability. And typically in the tech world, when we talk about interoperability, we're looking at other tech systems that we need that interoperability with. But in the government space, we need to think of not only other tech systems, but we need to look at interoperability with our existing systems. So when I implemented blockchain solutions into voting and into the marriage license process for my county, we had to do it in a way that had interoperability with paper ballots. We had to, in the voting space, we had to do it in a way that had interoperability with the antiquated database that tracked all marriage certificates for the state of Utah. And so as we're looking at these solutions, can we talk a little bit about interoperability and the types of things I would like you to address are things like other systems, other government entities, implementation, but also future compatibility as the world becomes more tech and more metaverse?
So I spend a lot of my time in Europe because they want to hear what I have to say about blockchain the most. Because the European nations are realizing that this is what they're having to do, right? Because they want to sit there and have the European Commission, identity becomes a huge piece on that. And we have it in the United States too, between state and federal and things of that nature. And what do we have all of that look like? In fact, right now, I'm going to out myself. I have one birth date on my passport because I messed up, and one birthday on my driver's license because Texas actually has my correct birthday. But the systems are not intertwined, so nobody knows that, right? And so I have to juggle with the airplane industry and everything else to figure out which birthday I'm going to be using today, and in which context. And by the way, in Europe, I got bit on that big because Europe went ahead and did everything off the passport, and then when I tried to use my driver's license, they're like, nope, you can't board the plane. So, you have to figure out those on the interoperability, but also with the systems itself, I feel like for some of those different pieces, you really do have to crack that identity nut on that for government. That's the one that I see that comes up very often, and how do you do that abstraction? When I was at Hyperledger, that's one reason why I talked to Indy about abstracting out Aries, was so that you could have the DIDs being abstracted and they could come to, and now we have, now they have another group foundation, I don't know, at the Linux Foundation that is also working on the DIDs and the identity aspects for standardization on that so that you can be interoperable. Because we are talking about global supply chain now, right? And we are talking about being global citizens and what that looks like. And so if we want to do things like address CO2, or if we want to do things like, where my car was made, or any of those different pieces, we have to figure out what those portions are going to be.
You want to talk about interoperability?
Yes. So I can comment on technical side of interoperability.
Absolutely.
Of course, when it comes to interoperability, this is, as I mentioned before, multi-chain that kind of goes with cross-chain as well. That means for us, what we see, the interoperability is one of the most important topics. Again, you should not bet on one chain anyway. So the best way how to move forward from my perspective is basically not to write for one specific, your app or project for one specific chain. You should be actually abstracted. You should be abstracted from that one chain. You should be able to work on any chain you would like to in the future, because you don't know what will happen with that chain in 3-year time. You can't bet on them. Even Hyperledger can, kind of maybe die. Anyone can,
Well, even if it doesn't die, we started our marriage licenses and our marriage certificates on the Ethereum blockchain, and where that's it's very stable, it's also gotten incredibly expensive. Yes. And so we buy our seals in batches of 10,000. When we get to the end of this batch of 10,000, we have to switch to a new blockchain, because in the government world, we can't afford to be charging those gas fees for a basic, basic identity document, right?
Exactly. And so, sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, as he was saying, never put data on the blockchain. Please abstract your data out.
Oh, yeah, a hash. Put a cryptographic hash.
Yes, so that you can do what he's talking about eventually, and yes, definitely evaluate the blockchains on their ability to do things like cross and side and things of that nature. But yeah, just don't do that, please.
And especially PII, don't ever put personally identifiable information on a blockchain, ever. Even if it's a private blockchain, put a hash.
Always put a hash, and always, if you can, like I said, try to abstract in regards to it, so that if you do need to port, you will be able to port.
I mean, except one day, once we will have zero-knowledge protocols in place on those chains, and it will be actually viable, which is not, because in most cases what chains are doing, and I'm furious about that, is they are trying to use zero-knowledge for hiding transactions, which is quite the opposite I would like to see, actually, because I'm all about transparency, and hiding transactions is against transparency. But if you think about zero knowledge in terms of disclosing the data, is this person in the bar, me, over 21, yes, no? That's good enough. That would change the world. I think zero knowledge, if you are not into that, check it out. It's going to be much bigger than anything else we have seen so far. And so that would be my...
Yeah, no, absolutely. To get
I hope
into a
they
bar,
do.
they need to know you're 21. They don't need to know your birth date and your address and your eye color.
I don't.
We will get in about 2 minutes. We'll go to questions if that's okay. So do you,
I just want to cap that with a little bit of a different point of view because I grew up across the globe. So I was born in the Middle East, grew up in Europe, and then half of my life is spent here in the US. So, and if you think that we have problems here with government agencies and all the stuff, you haven't the faintest clue. I mean, outside there are places where you would spend months trying to get your driver license or a replacement or stuff like that. So every day I tell my kids, you are lucky that you've been born in this country, not anywhere else. That's number one. Number two is, that was yesterday and today. Unfortunately, there are areas now that are moving better. So for example, Estonia, the entire government is electronic and they are moving very quickly. Dubai, Middle East. So everything there is moving into blockchain and everything is electronic as well. So it's true that we have it good. It's true that we have really advanced systems, but those have been built by our grandfathers, not by us. So we need to update our infrastructure for our kids and grandkids, and that starts with interoperability and utilization of cutting-edge technologies like what Emilia is doing.
all right, we're going to move into our question and answer period. I do ask that when you ask a question, that you ask a quick question and not tell us a story. After 30 seconds, we will cut you off and we will bring it to our experts for an answer. So do we have a quick question, Mustafa, at the back?
It was discussed under the category of interoperability, but is that specific kind of problem more about the two agencies not speaking to each other or sharing data, or is it more of a technical roadblock or obstacle that needs to be overcome?
Actually, I don't want it to be a technical aspect to be overcome because honestly, I don't want them all sharing all of my information all over the place. That's why I do want the zero knowledge proofs and I do want the verification mechanisms where the data is not, I don't want everybody passing around my information everywhere. I don't want the state of Texas coordinating with the federal government, which is also, oh, hey, look, you went to California, so now it's going to go to California now, and oh, look, you flew on a plane to here, so now it's going to be here now too. I really don't want that. I don't want that proliferation to happen.
Preach.
And so that's why I'm so into the blockchain aspects, because I've been involved in the identity world for a long time. I'm Silona Bonewald. My name has been a unique identifier since CompuServe. So I've got a history on the internet. I realized when all my dirty jokes went from Usenet onto the web that I was kind of screwed because I used my name. I was a teenager. I wasn't thinking about it yet. I didn't think in the 80s we weren't thinking, oh, yeah, this is going to happen. I just thought it was fun to sit there and trade dirty jokes with people. But yeah, I don't want the proliferation, and so that's why to me, it's a bigger problem in what I said, like the EU now does have my information because of me flying there and going through all of their visa processes. So now basically all across Europe, they think that that's my birthday, and it's not.
So I travel a lot also, and here's my follow-up question, and especially now where it takes a year to get your passport renewed, I have to imagine that if the TSA has a different date of birth for you than your state driver's license, that is a logistical nightmare. Because if the TSA is like, oh, this is not your birthday, I have to imagine that you get all kinds of special time in that side interview room.
Yes. There's been multiple times where I just carry my passport with me so that I can just show it instead of my driver's license at this point because of the fact that it's become so prevalent on so many of those inter-network systems that now I have the wrong birthday. And I don't know how to unwind it because I do international travel about every 1 or 2 months, and there's no way I can do without my passport to fix it. And not to mention, I still haven't figured out how I'm supposed to fix it.
Right. Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
Is it on? Oh, okay. This is for you, Amelia. You mentioned the gas fees on the Ethereum blockchain, right? Why don't you just use the XRP ledger instead?
Right, and the reason why is because when I developed this in 2019. And so there really wasn't enough mature technology to be able to use for government systems. And so we're coming to the end of end of our seals, the batch seals that we have for Ethereum.
Okay.
But thankfully, I'm enough of a technologist that I did it blockchain agnostic so that it'll be an easy switch. And so we're in the process right now of analyzing other solutions and do they meet our criteria so that we can switch, which really goes to Jiri's point that that's how you need to develop it so that you can have that mobility as a solution for government.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah.
Question for Amelia. When it comes to, when you change your blockchain technologies, how does that impact your customer's experience? Does the validation method change? Does the user experience change, or is it all the same?
No, it's all the same. So, I mean, as your typical user on the back end, like if you are a merchant and you're selling goods and you're taking a Visa card, nobody on the back end knows if you switch your bank from Bank of America to Wells Fargo, right? That's all behind the scenes. So it's the same concept that when we give someone a digital marriage certificate, the process that they go through to verify that will lead them to an Ethereum. Right now, it leads them to the Ethereum chain so that they can see this hash was registered by the by the government of Utah County, and that this document is unchanged. Our verifier tool will still do the same thing, except for on a marriage certificate that is issued in 2024, it's going to lead them to a different blockchain for verification. But they won't see that. As the individual, I actually did this with, the beta was with my own marriage certificate, so I could show people without giving other people's information. And so with mine, when people verify as a user, I still have the same digital document with the same QR code that brings them to the seal. So the user experience doesn't change, but you can shift. Thank you so much to our panelists. This has been a great panel. If you guys have any questions, come up and ask us. The one topic we didn't get to was procurement rules, which is okay because it's after lunch and everybody would have fallen asleep anyway. But if you have questions on that, I can answer those later. Thank you so much, everyone.